Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football Deal. With that spring transfer portal winding down, this is the first time we're really diving into rankings, stacking these teams, heading into 2024. And you got your first official top 25 rankings heading into the 2024 season. You sent me this about 5 minutes ago before we went live. I already hate it. Going to dive in on a few of these questions. Would love to hear from you guys as well in the comments section. Let them have it in the comments section. That's the beauty about college football. We'll chop it up with you guys in the comments section before we get into it. And as always, just want to say thank you to you guys. It's been a blast diving into all these programs during the spring. The amount of support you guys have shown the fellas truly does mean a lot. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. And without further ado, let's get into this one. And Dill, you got 4 different tiers here: front runners, contenders, dark horse, and Cinderella teams, your top 25 teams. Let's start at the top with the front runners. The way I see it and the way I push back on this is if you're going to throw Ole Miss into that front runner category, I'd probably throw Michigan and Alabama in that category as well. Now, the way I look at it is I think you have a pretty clear top 4, at least in my opinion. Georgia, Oregon, Ohio State, Texas, I think are probably the clear 4 teams that I would be putting money on to win a national championship. I would love to hear your reasoning on why you're leaving out Michigan and Alabama from that kind of top tier, if you will, in the front runners category.
I just look at Ole Miss. I think what they did in the portal, I think they were able to keep a fair amount of that team together. You think about guys like Jackson Dart. I think keeping that quarterback is huge, keeping a handful of guys on defense, but adding some like true tier 1 guys, especially on that defensive line. And I think they did enough to bolster that offensive line. I don't think it's like a Georgia and Oregon type unit, but I think it's good enough to win a lot of games, especially in that Lane Kiffin offense. I just think they were able to push that defensive line kind of over the edge to me in terms of pure talent, which didn't feel like they had. And for Michigan and Bama, Michigan, I just don't know how you can ignore the questions you're going to have on offense when you lose J.J. McCarthy, when you lose a whole starting 5 on the offensive line. You like some of the talent, but they're not wildly explosive at that wide receiver spot. And if you don't have a quarterback who you kind of know is going to be really consistent, along with the fact that you're not going to be particularly explosive, it's hard to put them in there.
Yeah, no. So starting with Ole Miss first, and again, I don't mean to skip over Georgia, Oregon, Ohio State, Texas. We've talked at length about those 4 teams. They're clearly up there. Now, you look at Ole Miss, I'm totally with you, and it's not me having a problem putting them in the front runners category because I think you're absolutely right. You look at this Ole Miss team last year, they were 11-2. Their only 2 losses were on the road to Georgia and Alabama, 2 of the best teams you saw in the country, and they addressed the spots where they needed to kind of close the gap, right? The line of scrimmage play, they did a phenomenal job in the portal, arguably the best quarterback wide receiver room combination that you see in the country. The reason I put Michigan and Alabama in that category, especially a team like Michigan, a lot of people are going to write Michigan off because they lose, obviously, Jim Harbaugh. You lose J.J. McCarthy. You lose Blake Corum, that whole offensive line. What's been the recipe for Michigan to win the way they did the last 3 years? It's running the football and playing good defense. We had a I'm a Michigan fan. Michigan had a top 10 quarterback in the NFL draft in J.J. McCarthy. They didn't really use him like a top 10 quarterback in the NFL draft. So I look at this Michigan.
He made big plays when they needed big plays made. I think people ignore that. Like in that Ohio State game, he made huge throws consistently. Again, you have questions inherently when you lose that type of quarterback. You lose a lot more. Again, I'm not putting them at like 15 or something. They're right there. It's just I look at Ole Miss. I mean, they're taking their run at this thing very obviously, and they're loaded, I think.
And but I just look at the recipe. Michigan's still going to be able to run the football, and arguably maybe even more effective with Alex Orji at the quarterback spot. And then they're still going to be a top 3 defense in the country, arguably the number 1 defense in the country. So I just look at the recipe that Michigan has and say, I still see that recipe working in 2024. Alabama, I think my questions with Alabama, and I think that's a really fair spot to have them in. My questions with Alabama are not with Kalen DeBoer. And maybe I have some questions about Jalen Milroe taking over that Kalen DeBoer offense in terms of what he wants to do. More of my questions are Alabama has to replace a lot of talent, right? You lose 2 edge rushers to the NFL draft. You lose your 2 starting cornerbacks to the NFL draft. There's a lot of talent that you have to replace, but I think the offensive line, you certainly check that box. They're going to be able to run the football at Jalen Milroe, Justice Haynes, and Jam Miller. Alabama's still going to be Alabama. Yes, it is fair to have him there because you do have some questions. Get into Tennessee because this is a team that I'm just a little bit lower on. I love Missouri. I'll say that. I think I'd stick them into that contenders. I'm not sure if they have maybe that top end stuff on the line of scrimmage to be in that for. Although I think their offensive line is pretty damn good. But I want to hear you talk about Tennessee. You have Nico taking over at the quarterback spot. I think this Tennessee defense, a damn good defense. What's
That
your
defensive line for Tennessee, people don't talk about like they're one of the better units. That team is loaded up front on defense. James Pierce is a monster. Amari Thomas is really good. And they're deep and they're young and they're developing guys at a really high level at that spot right now. They're going to be monsters on the defensive line. I think Joe Milton had a lot to do with some of their offensive stagnation last year. And just in terms of his inability to create much, it felt like at times when things broke down.
And the consistency. I thought for Joe Milton, like you look at that Tennessee offense, and yeah, you make the flash throws with Joe Milton, but the consistency was just never there. And you look at that Tennessee offense, it is predicated on finding a rhythm. Joe Milton, we know him as Michigan fans, like he's just a quarterback that he'll make your jaw drop, but he also doesn't really find that rhythm. I think Nico can find that rhythm, and I think you said it best. Like you combine potentially an uptick in that offense with a really, really good defense, a sneaky good defense up there in Knoxville. I really do like this Tennessee team now.
You got questions because you need Nico to play really well. You need the secondary to find a way to be a little bit better. And they're obviously got to replace a fair amount of guys, but I think the lines of scrimmage on both sides are really good. I like the potential that Nico brings them. And I do think that program's just rolling the right way. I think Heupel's doing a really good job. And I think that's an important kind of factor in what I consider. I think that's a similar benefit I'm giving Florida State because they have to replace a lot of guys too. I just think Mike Norvell's got it rolling. They did a good job in the portal. They're starting to recruit a little bit better. So I think you look, Florida State to me, I feel very comfortable putting in that contender spot because I think Mike Norvell's doing a really good job.
All right, what you are going to need to answer for, though, because the Florida State Miami fans are going to give it to you in the comment section, putting Miami over Florida State. Here's how I look at it. I think Miami has the better depth chart. I think they have a little bit more high-end talent. That being said, I like Miami's roster better heading into 2024. I think Miami fans would probably agree with this too. I trust Mike Norvell to win those big games and make it happen when it matters most. So it's kind of that push-pull where you just saw Florida State play really good football when it mattered throughout the 2023 season. You saw the exact opposite from the Miami Hurricanes. I think Miami gets a heck of a lot better in the portal. I think they return a lot of talent. That depth chart it's a top 10 unit in the country in terms of talent, maybe even top 5. I think the question mark you have is, do you trust Miami or Florida State a little bit more to win those big games? I'd love to hear your takes on that one.
No, and that's fair. I think, frankly, I mean, you look, Florida State's got a lot of questions in terms of what they're replacing. They lost a lot of really good players, similar to Alabama, just a lot of pros, a lot of high-level pros, have a really good secondary, have good defensive line. Like that defense will really play at a high level, I think. Again, is that offense? You got to replace a lot of pieces, and you do have a little bit of questions at what they have at wide receiver. I just look at Miami. I mean, that's such a loaded team. Their offensive lines and defensive lines are both playing really well. I think they added some good players in the portal to bolster that defensive line, along with some young guys coming up like Ruben Bain and even some of the true freshmen. Miami is just really good. I think they're loaded. I think Cam Ward's a huge get. I think he allows them to be more explosive and maybe cut down on the mistakes that were killing them last year from Tyler Van Dyke. So Miami's a really loaded team. I think they can make a lot of noise.
Two things that separate Miami for me, and I've fallen under the Miami hype before. Why I'm so excited about this team. One, I think they're elite along the line of scrimmage on both sides of the football. And then secondly, obviously a massive upgrade at quarterback, but they return both their coordinators on both sides of the football. That's the first time we've seen Miami do that in a very long time, especially under the Mario Cristobal era. When you check the continuity from your coordinators as well as a really strong depth chart, I mean, that's a recipe for a team to be really dangerous. Notre Dame. I know a lot of you guys follow 24/7 Sports. Brandon Marcel left them out of the top 25.
Silly.
It's hard not to believe in them. And I think Riley Leonard's a step up from Sam Hartman. Sam Hartman, it was really exciting when you brought him in. The problem with Sam Hartman is in the big moments when you needed a quarterback to play his best, he just did it, right? Whether it's Ohio State, whether it was on the road at Louisville. I believe in Riley Leonard. I certainly believe in that defense that's going to be a top 10 unit in the country, maybe top 5. My question with Notre Dame is the offensive line and potentially pass catchers, but this is going to be a team that is awfully competitive.
Well, and that's like, what is their identity on offense going to be? I love bringing Denbrock back. I think they didn't really have anything last year that felt like it was hurting teams or something they could rely on. They didn't run the ball probably quite as well as you would have thought. And if you're going to play as poorly in the passing game as it felt like they did at times, especially against good teams, you need to be able to really run the football at an extremely high level. The interior offensive line is where my big questions are. Can that get better than it was last year? But again, you look, the defense is going to be really good. I like the addition of Denbrock. That's why I kind of have him here. I think that Riley Leonard can win them more games than Sam Hartman could have. And that's kind of where I put him up. But I do think it's really close with them and Clemson because obviously you saw Clemson beat them pretty good. Not pretty. I mean, that was a decent game.
So let's talk about Clemson. Like I am higher on most than Clemson. What's really holding me back from really jumping on the Clemson train here is the quarterback play. And you go to the spring game, it didn't look great. I think they're about as talented as we've seen a Clemson team in a long time in terms of the pass catchers. I think they got a lot of young pups there that you feel good about. Can Caleb Klubnik put it together? And I think it's fair to keep him at this tier just because you have to see it first for this Clemson team. And I think
it's been 3 years of this where the defense looks really good. They play really good. And then the offense just hasn't quite gotten going in the way that it was under Trevor Lawrence and Deshaun Watson, some of those great quarterbacks. So again, we're kind of all waiting for them to get that magic back. I think it's still there. Defense is going to be unbelievable. So that's why you keep them up there. They probably could be in that contender spot for sure because you can win a championship.
You know who reminds me a lot of Clemson and a team that you're kind of lower on is Penn State. Like you know that Penn State defense is going to be really good. You got 2 third-year quarterbacks who are former 5-stars coming out of high school who check a lot of boxes from the physical traits category. You just haven't seen them for there yet. You watch both of their spring games. It doesn't look like it gets a whole lot better. So I'm kind of with you on Penn State. I think that might be a little low because I still think they'll be able to run the football, play good defense, and maybe
that offense, like we talked about Clemson being anemic. I mean, that Penn State offense has been preposterously anemic. Again, bringing Kolomnicki in is huge. I don't know that you saw it in the spring game, which was one of my concerns. Like, oh man, this looks pretty similar to what it was last year.
Yeah.
I don't think they have a ton of weapons on the edge. I mean, the defense, of course, it's going to be really good. It's always been really good for like a while. And the defense, especially that front seven, is really, really good. I have such little confidence in the offense to be championship level. It's hard to put them up against teams that, again, have like more potential, I feel like, to do something and do something about what their struggles were. So I look at Oklahoma. I mean, they're getting there. Their defense is getting better. Their offense has been good. I think it'll be good with Arnold. LSU, kind of same thing. Offense is great. Bring in Blake Baker. Do something. Try to ignite a spark in that side, and you win a lot of games. And then Elko at A&M. I just like these teams feel like there's maybe more potential. I'm concerned about what Penn State can be offense.
So I'm okay with Oklahoma there at the dark horse spot because I do still have some question marks about the top end offensive line play heading into the SEC with a young quarterback. I think they check a lot of boxes, but I don't love going into SEC play with potential question marks on the offensive line with the young quarterback. I'm not going to let you skate by with LSU, though. I think LSU is a team that it's going to be is the offense going to take some steps back? You lose 2 first-round wide receivers. You lose the number 2 pick in the NFL draft and Jaden Daniels, Heisman Trophy winner. This LSU offense is still going to be top 10 unit in the country, maybe even top 5. I am a strong believer in this LSU offense. It's an elite offensive line. Why don't you believe in the defense? And yes, I think that you see that headline, LSU really thin on the inside of the defensive line. Yes, that is some big questions you have to answer. Do you not believe in Blake Baker coming in and just revamping this defense to be maybe 75th in the country? I mean, you were almost dead last in defense last year. The way I look at LSU is if this
I'm too low on LSU.
Yes.
Oh, what? Like I'm not that low on them. I don't think. I mean, I'm not high on them. I think given what I think their defense will be, I'd be surprised if they really are pushing for a national title. But again, that's why I put them in the dark. I don't think I'm not putting them out in Siberia saying like.
So what is they're 15th in the country for you? What does this LSU team look like if they have a 75th defense in the country?
Oh, they're a dangerous team. They're top 10 football. I mean, I don't think 75 gets you to that like better range of the contenders. I think you have to be a little bit. 75 is not great. It's obviously better than what it was last year. again, their
What were
defense.
they last year if they had a 75th defense? They were one of the most dangerous teams in the SEC. That defense.
I'm not sure their offense will be that good again. I mean, again, Jaden Daniels, like I know they have weapons. I like Garrett Nussmeier coming back, but they're losing 3 first-rounders. Their offensive line is still going to be dominant, and you love that about them. Nussmeier has a lot of experience, and I think he'll be good, and they have good wideouts. I just don't think it's going to be as good as what Jaden Daniels was such a weapon last year. It was a magical year he put together. I just think given that the defense, I still think, again, we've seen first-year coordinators take over. I think they'll be better, but it does take a second for these defensive coordinators to get their scheme and get their guys playing fast in the right way. And when you don't have a ton of talent, especially in that front or that defensive front, I want to say front seven because linebackers are good. I just don't know how you can put them up above a team like Clemson, who you just know the defense is going to be elite. You can think that you have some reason to believe their offense will be better. I think their offense.
It sounds like you like LSU more than you think you like LSU. Now, moving on.
I don't think I'm that low on them, frankly, is kind of where I'm at.
I trust LSU to win more football games with that offense than I think I do Clemson. Yeah, we'll see. LSU is a big time question mark because if Blake Baker can turn around that defense, I am such a strong believer in that LSU offense. I don't think it's going to take nearly the step back a lot of people think it will because you see on paper they lose all that NFL draft talent. Texas A&M, you guys know I'm a believer in Texas A&M. I think they have one of, if not the best defensive lines in the country. Let's talk about this Utah team. I think it's your favorite to win the Big 12. Your return Cam Rising. Though this Utah team won 8 games last year. With quarterback play, that was no shot at the FCS level, but FCS caliber quarterback play. They won 8 games. You get one of the more experienced and, quite frankly, one of the better quarterbacks in the country back healthy with Cam Rising. You lose some guys on the defensive side of the football, but I'm kind of in that boat where I'm just trusting Utah to play good defense. Like I still like a lot of their names on defense. I think they have some skill on the offensive side.
That's the reason I have them there. They actually have legitimate offensive skill this year. You have Cam Rising back. He's like as experienced as you can be at this point.
Yeah.
A zillion ways. I mean, he's been in college for forever. The defense is going to be good. I wish they kept those safeties. Obviously, those guys declare early. Those 2 are studs, but they keep a bunch of guys in that cornerback room who are good players. Keep guys like Junior Tafanu up front. Guys in the linebacker room like Lander Barton. So you kind of know the defense will be good. I'm just saying, I think this offense can take if they can just play explosive, and they have the talent to do it now. I think their offensive line needs to get better. It's been a really good unit for a while. I don't think last year was their best, but they were playing with some young guys. So again, that takes a step. They could be knocking on something being really competitive. I think they can be more realistic than what I would call a Cinderella team.
Going to your Cinderella teams, the teams that again are top 25 teams, we're calling them Cinderella teams because it'd be like if they are competing for national championship, it'd probably surprise a lot of us. Let's start with USC. And you have USC down here, and I'm kind of with you, and I think a lot of USC fans would probably agree as well, right? Going into the Big Ten, you obviously wish they did a little bit more on the defensive line. Kind of a similar story to LSU, which just makes that week 1 matchup just so much more intriguing where you lose Caleb Williams, Heisman Trophy winner. You have a ton of talent at the wide receiver spot. We saw what Miller Moss can do in the Rose Bowl game, but against Louisville in the bowl game. I think the big question mark is, can this USC defense take a step? Now, if they address the defensive line a little bit better than they did, I'd probably be higher on USC. But heading into the Big Ten, when you have to play teams like Iowa or like Minnesota that are going to run the football, try to play time of possession, you do have some question marks about USC winning those games consistently when you have big-time question marks about the depth on the inside of the defensive line.
Yep, and it's a very similar. It's really hard to win games really consistently when you struggle to stop the run. I think LSU might be a little bit in that boat. I certainly think USC is going to be in that boat. Again, you love the talent they have on offense. I think they have 4 really good young wide receivers who I'm super excited about. I just think, again, you look at what I'm trying to project that defensive line into, I am very concerned. That is the one thing. If their young guys play really well, which again, you don't want to go in counting on that. LSU's kind of similar boat.
I'll say this: you get a Brandon Lane commitment, SF Austin to USC. We're maybe bumping them up to the dark horse category. Like that's what they're missing on the defensive side of the football. Kansas State, I'm a believer. I love Coach Kleiman. I love Avery Johnson. Dylan Edwards coming into the running back room. You have Quentin Cephas coming in the wide receiver room. This Kansas State team is going to be dangerous. And I think that it's very telling that they told Will Howard, they didn't tell him to kick rocks, but they told him to leave. They're going to go with Avery Johnson. I love Avery Johnson. I think the ceiling is super high with that kid. NC State's another intriguing team that I'm going to agree with you on. I think a lot of people like Louisville in the ACC. I like Louisville too, but NC State was another one of those teams where they had brutal quarterback play. You talk about just a whiff in the transfer portal. Brennan Armstrong was a whiff. You bring in Grayson McCall, you make a ton of additions to the offensive skill, right? Concepcion, one of the more dynamic wide receivers, really offensive playmakers in the country. You bring in Noah Rogers from Ohio State, former top 50 national prospect. You have a really good run game. You kind of trust Dave Dorn's going to have a really good defense and a solid offensive line. I think
you have better continuity in a lot of spots. Like that offensive line is going to return for 3 or 4 guys who are, again, I didn't think that was their best unit last year or one of the better NC State O-lines, but trust the development of what they've done because they've always been really good. You return a bunch of guys. Defense, similar story. You return a handful of guys, and they've really done a good job developing them. They just have an upgraded level of offensive skill and a quarterback who I have much more confidence in. So that's, to me, them versus Louisville or some of these other ACC teams. I mean, their skill and talent is kind of as high as we've kind of seen it, I feel like, for Dave Doran in a while. And Dave Doran with a lot of skill is a dangerous man because that guy can
go. That's right. I see NC State very similar to Utah. Like Utah and NC State had miserable quarterback play in 2023. They both won 8 games. They were both extremely competitive. Obviously, Cam Rising comes back for Utah. If you guys listen to me in the transfer report, like I'm a really big believer in Grayson McCall, and I think he fits what NC State wants to do on offense a little bit better.
I know we like to talk about transfers, but Concepcion might be the best player. Like, he might be the best skill guy on that team. He
might be one of the better skill guys. I think he's certainly the best skill guy on the NC State Wolfpack, but I think he might be one of the better in the ACC. Auburn, I'm with you. Like I look at Auburn, I also look at a team like Florida in the SEC and say they got a lot of young talent. I think there's a lot of reasons to believe Auburn has a bigger turnaround than a lot of people expect. Right, Peyton Thorne now has legitimate weapons on the outside. I think the offensive line is going to be damn good. And I think Hugh Freeze taking over the offense a little bit more. You feel good about Auburn's offense actually putting it together, at least taking a step in 2024. Still, UCF is a sleeper team in the Big 12. Like, you know, the boys are high on UCF, and you look at how Gus Malzahn wants to run things. That rushing attack is going to be one of the best units in the country, right? You look at KJ Jefferson, you bring in Penny Boone in the portal. RJ Harvey is one of the more slept-on running backs in the country. Those are 3 names in KJ Jefferson, RJ Harvey, and Penny Boone who are absolute hammers. And you look at UCF, they're going to run the ball extremely effectively. And when you can run the football like UCF, put the points up on the board like they can, they're going to be a team that can beat a lot of teams in the Big 12 in 2024. Virginia Tech, Nebraska, 2 teams that just return a ton of production. I think Virginia Tech,
both teams are starting to play the right way, and they're still making mistakes that are killing them, which hurts. I imagine both fan bases badly, but you look at some of those moments where both defense are playing ultra physical. You go to that like Syracuse game against for Virginia Tech. I was like watching that on a Thursday night or whenever it was. I'm like, man, this team's the play. Blacksburg was rocking. It was just like, it felt like, oh, this is what you kind of missed on Fuentes. There was an intensity. They just, again, return a zillion guys who are really, really good. I don't think they have the top end talent to put them into like that higher level. I think they're still working on building that, but they're going to be a really solid football team. In Nebraska, if Dylan Raiola plays really well, they might be vaulting into that dark horse. I mean, that you talk about bad quarterback play. I haven't seen quarterback play that bad that Nebraska had to deal with last year, probably in my life as a college football fan. And they still were able to keep themselves in a lot of football games. They get good quarterback play. This is a dangerous.
So I did my breakout teams, or like more or less teams that are going to take a step in 2024. And I included both Virginia Tech and Nebraska. And for 2 reasons that I want to expand upon real quick. And I know we're running 25 minutes. It's been long. Dill, Virginia Tech, Nebraska, they both return so much production, right? Virginia Tech, number 1 in the country, Nebraska, number 3 in the country in returning production. That's important, I think, in college football. You look at so many teams that are just a revolving door in the transfer portal. Not a lot of teams have a lot of continuity. I look at both of those teams and say, but they both flashed in 2023. Like you said, made too many mistakes to really kind of vault themselves in that 8-win category. I think Kyron Drones, I think, is a really high upside quarterback. I think he fits exactly what Virginia Tech wants to do. I think both of these teams, with the amount of production that they return, there's a lot to be excited about both of these programs. Before we close out, I want to throw in just 3 teams that I think you might be sleeping on a little bit. I said Louisville. I think Kansas is a really interesting team as well. I'm a believer in Jalen Daniels if he stays healthy. If Jalen Daniels stayed healthy last year, that Kansas team was extremely dangerous. And then I'm going to go to another Big 12 team in Arizona. Like, I look at the quarterback play. Obviously, Noah Fafita, T-Mac, one of the better quarterback wide receiver duos you'll see in the country. That just makes a dangerous team. And again, you have some question marks. Obviously, losing Jedd Fisch, you have question marks about line of scrimmage play. But I look at those 2 teams and say they can win a lot of football games with the amount of offense that they're going to be able to produce. Dill, you left out a lot of teams. I hope people light you up in the comment section. That's the beauty of college football. Appreciate you guys rocking with the boys. My top 25 coming out Monday night. I'm still cooking, still in the lab a little bit. Appreciate you guys rocking with the fellas. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later.